So yeah, thank you all for joining in on our talk about space system vulnerabilities. It's our first time here at Black Hat, and it has been amazing so far. So thank you all for joining in. Quick word about the team. So I'm Milenko Starczyk. I'm currently heading the cybersecurity section at Vision Space, a small company in the space and defense industry. Joined today by my colleague Andre.
Yeah, my name is Andre. I've been working for the company since a couple of years now. And prior to that, I used to work for the European Space Agency for more than a decade.
Yeah, also today in the room, two people without those who this would not have been possible. So Ricardo, also in the first row, and also Ayman, also here today from our research team. So why are we talking about space systems? And space systems have been in the media currently quite a lot, and there's a reason for that. So we saw satellite launches to the low Earth orbit, so usually Earth observation or telecommunications satellites, pretty heavily during the Cold War period, driven by the defense industry. And then it slowed down a bit around the 2000s. But now in recent years, there has been an explosion of a number of satellites launched into the Earth orbit. And this is primarily driven by commercial satellite constellations like Starlink, pretty popular, but also OneWeb, for example, where there's a huge number of satellites being launched. And next to that, there's a second trend. There's a remilitarization. So actually, the defense industry, so governments are launching more and more missions again for intelligence gathering, but also for communications. And something that is again happening more and more is a dual use. So for example, Starlink's terminals used on the front line in Ukraine, coupled with these large numbers of assets in orbit, this means that there is a very high attack surface with very high value targets now. So stepping back a little bit, we looked at what has been done already on research in the field of space systems. And so we looked especially now here at Black Hat, and actually we found the earliest talk we could find was satellite hacking for fun and profit, which is actually still very fun to watch. So from 2009. And this continued, this kind of research, until like 2022, where it was focused mostly on user equipment, so satellite terminals. And then 2022, there was a breaking point when there was the Viasat incident. So this was at the onset of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when the day before they actually launched a cyber attack against Viasat and turned down tens of thousands of modems of the company. And then the year after, here on stage, there was actually a talk by the Viasat VP together with the NSA on how they did incident response on that. And so our question for our research was what was happening since, and what are fields that have not been looked into too much. And to explain this, I want to step back a little bit and explain you how a space system works. So on a very high level, you have, of course, a spacecraft. So this is the most obvious part, can be multiple. For example, in a constellation, you might have dozens or hundreds or thousands of spacecrafts. Then you have the ground segment. So this is all the terrestrial infrastructure supporting the space mission. For example, here depicted by a ground station antenna, but there's much more. This is just the visible part. There are also mission control centers, there's science centers, there's all kinds of supporting infrastructure, fiber networks, and so on. And then there is the user segment. So this is what comes out of the mission. For example, user terminals with a Starlink terminal, this would belong into the user segment, but also data products that are produced by a SAR mission, for example. So an example science mission might look like this. So you have a couple of spacecrafts in orbit communicating over a radio frequency link with your ground station network, and you have your mission control center linked up to that. And then that is distributing actually data to the science data center, which is doing some post-processing, refining the data, and supplying it to the end users or scientists in this case. In order to control the spacecraft, you need some operators. So this is not fully automated. You still need very much humans in the loop. So teams 24/7 working on the operations of the spacecraft. And especially since COVID, there's a lot of remote work happening. So traditionally, this perimeter-based security is no longer the case. And the systems that have been built for this perimeter-based security are now exposed to the internet and to new threats. So inside the mission control center, that's the heart of the mission, there's a lot of IT infrastructure and a lot of custom software which is developed to support the mission, to automate things. Among this, for example, astrodynamic software to calculate where your satellite is, where it will be, but also mission planning software to plan the future steps, what you want to do with your missions, for example, from inputs from the science community. And then there is mission control software. So this is what actually the spacecraft operators will use to control the spacecraft. So this is the human-machine interface. And for that, we looked into some open source software that is available, which is pretty popular. So there's, for example, YAMCS, which is used for a number of smaller satellite missions, but also currently being planned to be used for lunar rovers and is used for the European robotic arm on the ISS. There's NASA's OpenMCT, which is used to control Mars rovers. And we also looked into OpenC3 Cosmos, which is also gaining popularity among smaller satellite missions. On the other aspect, we looked into spacecrafts. So again, mission reuse, so things that don't affect just one mission, that don't just affect one operator, but could affect multiple. And here the most popular software framework is again from NASA. It's the Core Flight System, or short CFS, which is, for example, used to build small satellite missions, has, I think, over 20 years of legacy already, but it's also used to build payloads for the James Webb Space Telescope, for example, and is currently being qualified for human spaceflight for the Lunar Gateway. Another thing we looked at is F-Prime. That's a small framework also from NASA, which was used to control the Ingenuity Mars helicopter, and IIT Core, which is a small toolkit to build Python applications to run on the ISS for experiments. So what traditionally meant, let's say in the 80s, 90s, destroying a satellite was actually launching a rocket at it. And this is what many of the big spacefaring nations have shown. So the US, China, Russia, India, they all have demonstrated that they can do this. They have the capability to actually shoot down a satellite. But what we found is that actually you can have a much easier time if you combine and change some vulnerabilities you find in the software on ground or on the space segment to actually take down a space mission. And this, to be said, is that water is red. So as we said, a lot of this software has a lot of legacy, and traditionally it was not designed for security. The developer didn't have requirements to implement strict security, to implement zero trust into the software, to make it ready to be exposed to the internet, to have someone connecting to a VPN and controlling the spacecraft. This was never a requirement when these guys developed this software. So naturally, once you start looking into these, you will find vulnerabilities, also some very low-hanging fruits. And yeah, so my colleague Andy will now show you some of these.
Yeah, so what you're gonna see now are a couple of demos showing different vulnerabilities, different attack vectors, and also different ways of exploitation or different exploitation techniques. But in principle, what we want is to take over control of a spacecraft or a system that is controlling the spacecraft. So we will start with showing you a little bit about YAMCS and its functionality. It's a mission control system which spacecraft operators use to control the spacecraft. And it's vulnerable to, among other things, one of the vulnerability is an XSS, which actually give us, as adversaries, an opportunity to send arbitrary command to spacecraft. So since it's an XSS, to pull this off, we have to fish a user with a file. And together with XSS exploitation, we will actually be able to send telecommand on behalf of the user. So what you'll see on the left-hand side is the YAMCS mission control system. It's a standard mission control system with a bunch of functionality that any other system would have, like processing telemetry and displaying the telemetry, sending telecommands, and so on. And on the right-hand side, for the sake of demonstration, we have created a simulation. It's a spacecraft orbiting low Earth orbit, and the simulation is much faster than real time, so we can actually see the results of our activities. Now, YAMCS comes with very useful functionality, which also lets the users to define, say, engineering values based on the raw parameter values or any other functionality within the system using JavaScript. And actually, this is the component which you can see on the left-hand side. This is the component that is vulnerable to an XSS. And also for the purpose of the demonstration, we have defined a telecommand that once it's triggered at Spacecraft, it will trigger the orbit transition maneuver to the medium air orbit. And so in principle, you will see the spacecraft moving higher to the higher orbit. So this is the command, and we are not going to send it now. Instead, we're going to have a look how we could send it using the XSS. So as I mentioned before, there YAMCS comes with a scripting functionality. So this is an example of a file that comes with YAMCS. It doesn't really matter what it does. What matters is that it is possible to embed a payload with an HTML tag, which then, once the script is loaded, it actually is going to execute. And it is not encoded, so then we can actually see what we are doing. And our goal is to send this telecommand to the spacecraft through the API, which YAMCS provides. So let's load the script. So imagine I'm a user. I received a file from one of my colleagues. It could be our internal phishing campaign. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna load the file. And I'm just gonna open it. So you should probably notice right now that the spacecraft started deviating from its original orbit, but it's not clear what has happened, because even if you know what exactly this code does, there is nothing suspicious in the code. So the payload which you saw before is not visible here, and that's because this particular component doesn't display the HTML tags at all. It is hidden. However, the web browser actually executes them, and then therefore the JavaScript was executed, giving us the sending the telecommand to spacecraft on behalf of the user. And the only way for the user to know that this has happened is to either actually see that the spacecraft moved away from using the telemetry, or in the command history, where you can see now that the telecommand was sent. So that was demo number 1. Let me stop it so I have resources for the next one. Okay, so the next one is another mission control system, OpenC3. Among other vulnerabilities, it is also vulnerable to an XSS. But in this case, we will be able to take over the entire mission control system. We will attempt to get the remote code execution on it with one simple XSS. And again, because it's an XSS, we focus on the spacecraft operators as our target of a phishing campaign. And once the user goes to the URL of the phishing campaign, it should give us a reverse shell back to the system. So let me start it first. Just give it a second. Okay, so OpenC3, this is how it looks like. It comes with similar functionalities to the previous one. You have telemetry capabilities, telecommanding capabilities. It also comes with a script running engine, which we will also take advantage of. I'm not going to go through the functionality. The exploitation of this XSS is a little bit more tricky because it's multi-stage. It requires to make multiple calls to the API backend. The first one is to grab the session tokens, which we'll then use to deploy the malicious script, and then eventually trigger it with one of the last calls. And so we decided to make a script that will generate the URL with our payload. and the function which we want to, or the command which we want to execute. And this is the URL we would fish our user with. So I'm just gonna copy it. I'm gonna start our listener, and then imagine I'm a user that fell for the phishing campaign. I went to the URL, I see my mission control system, which looks like nothing has happened, but here we just got a reversal back to the system that is running mission control system, which is OpenC3. So okay, so that was the second demo. Let me stop it and go to the next one. Okay, so next up is this one is gonna be a little bit different because we are not targeting ground systems at all. We are going to target the spacecraft directly. So imagine you are a nation state. You have access to your own ground station and mission control. And let's assume that you are within visibility of the spacecraft, so you can actually send some data to spacecraft. And then also let's assume that this spacecraft is running, as an onboard software, is running the older NASA CFS or core flight system onboard software. So again, with the CFS, we'll try to get an RCE to the spacecraft directly. For the demonstration purposes, we're gonna get a reverse shell back, but that might not be practical. You probably want to do something else. And the way we're gonna do that is to target with some malicious data, we're gonna target the memory management module of the CFS or the weaknesses of that module. So let me start the simulation. Now this one is a little bit more advanced. It is also multi-staged, and it requires communication between ground station and the spacecraft back and forth, because we're gonna send some telecommands, and then we'll have to leak some information from the spacecraft from the memory. The memory management module of CFS. So the main issue with that module, what was that you could read or write memories within the memory space, not only of that module, but of the entire process running CFS. And because CFS is running on a Linux-based operating system, you can imagine there is many different things we can do to actually abuse this weakness. What we're gonna do now is, or what we decided to do in our research, was to tap into the global offset table, grab the addresses of the functions of our interest, and then change those addresses to what we want, and then execute. So in our research, we found out which, based on certain telecommands, we found out which CPU instruction is gonna be executed next, or which call to the function is gonna be executed next. And we are gonna replace that address of that function with the address of a function of our interest. So because, again, it's a little bit complex, and it requires communication back and forth, we have developed a script that will take care of the whole communication with the spacecraft. And in the end, it will let us execute this just for the sake of the reverse shell, just for the sake of demonstration. So I'm gonna start the listener. So we are leaking the memory addresses from libc, and now we are dumping the content of the memory of spacecraft, looking for the address of memchr function, because our intention is to replace that address with the system, because we want to have a code execution on the spacecraft platform. So once the telemetry comes down and we get the address in a couple of seconds, then we send a telemetry. So okay, here we have leaked the memory address, and then with telemetry, with telecommanding, we have replaced we have overwritten the global offset table at Spacecraft with this function, and then eventually the function was executed, giving us reverse shell to Spacecraft. So that was the last demo.
Yeah, into presentation mode again. All right, so to summarize, we just showed some of the vulnerabilities, but we found actually a lot more. So in OpenC3 Cosmos and YAMCS, but also in OpenMCT. And what was especially concerning was not just that we found some XSS, but we found actually higher critical vulnerabilities in all of these systems. So prototype pollution in OpenMCT, which is JavaScript based. In YAMCS, we could get arbitrary file deletion on the operating system. And on Cosmos, we could get remote code execution and actually take over the containers running the system. And the same goes on for the onboard software. So we have the core flight system with a number of vulnerabilities, but also there's CryptoLib, which is actually a plugin for the core flight system, which is built modular. And so this is an extension which allows you to encrypt your telemetry and commands, so the data that you're exchanging with the spacecraft, and also to do authentication and key management for the sessions. And we found actually vulnerabilities which allow you to crash the entire onboard software with an unauthenticated telecommand that you send. So basically you send a packet to the spacecraft and the entire software crashes and reboots, which then actually causes the CryptoLib, if it's not properly configured, to reset all its keys. And then you have some all-zero keys on the spacecraft that you can use from that stage on. Also F prime, we found some vulnerabilities where you can actually do remote code execution, as well as AIT core, which was using Pickle for some networking. So again, here we have the same game, a lot of high and critical vulnerabilities across all of these systems. And sure enough, so we published all of this over the past years. And so this got some attention from other researchers as well, which is great, but you always just wonder why you haven't found it in the first place. So worth to mention is especially about CryptoLib. So someone else found out that how you can actually bypass the authentication mechanisms and how you can corrupt the key base on the spacecraft with using that software. And even more, there was also some memory problems inside that library, which led to some high and critical vulnerabilities on the system. So what are our final thoughts? So first of all, this was all found in open source software. And the space industry is 99.9% closed software. So our question is, what is to be found there? And what we would like to see is also some more rewards for researchers. So we've done this on the side, but it would be nice if there would be some incentives to actually do this kind of work. For the missions themselves, I think what would be interesting would be for them to look a bit more into the security safety trade-offs, because especially when you look into authentication for spacecraft and backup mechanisms, because you cannot fly up to your spacecraft and recover it easily, people are very, very cautious about adding too much security to their mission. And there needs to be mitigation strategies for missions that are already up there that cannot be properly maintained. And there need to be hard decisions made. What happens when you have an insecure mission and you cannot fix it? So we think that while space is hard, space security doesn't have to be hard. There's a lot of traditional IT security rules and best practices which can be applied, but still need to be rolled out. So with that, to say that water is wet, even in space systems. Yeah, thank you very much for joining our session.